Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's episode of our podcast where we discuss several aspects of the French culture. We're grateful to have with us Pierre, a student from
Bonjour.
France. Bonjour, Pierre. Merci beaucoup de nous rejoindre aujourd'hui.
Mhm.
Thank you for being with us today. We're so grateful to have you. Um, Today, I'd like to talk a little bit more about an important aspect of the French culture and very well known. So we're talking about literature and art in general. So of course, it's such a broad topic, and so many authors, so many artists, so many artistic movements from different time periods.
Mhm.
And I like to just talk a little bit maybe about one of the most famous, Les Misérables, um,
Mhm.
a novel by Victor Hugo that was published in French in 1862, and it was such an instant popular success, was quickly translated into several languages, and we had several film adaptations based on this novel. So
Mhm.
um, I know that the novel it's set in the Parisian um, in Paris, and it's plotted like a detective story. So the work follows, for example, what happens to Jean Valjean, who was a victim of society and was imprisoned for 19 years for stealing a loaf of bread. And
Yeah. So
um,
the 19 years are like initially because of a loaf of bread, and then he tries to escape several times, which contributes to the lengthening of his sentence. Yes.
Exactly, yes. And last time we talked about Paris, so the modern Paris, but it's interesting how Le Miserable also gives us panorama of the Parisian society from the 1800s, and also, for example, contains many famous episodes and passages, such as you have a chapter on the Battle of Waterloo, the description of Valjean's rescue of Marius by means of a flight to the sewers of Paris. So it's such a fascinating novel. If you can talk a little bit about the appeal um, and how also, for example, when we studied this in school, how it was presented to French students.
Yes. So I read Les Misérables on of my own volition, so it wasn't on my program when I was in high school, and it took me a long while to finish because it is a dense novel. That's why
Mhm.
I wouldn't maybe qualify it as like a detective novel or something of the sort because it's very dense.
Mhm.
Several chapters read off as like essays on historical battles, like at Waterloo, which does have a plot importance. There's, I think, two entire chapters dedicated to understanding how the Parisian sewers work before they're
Mhm.
introduced as a plot element.
Mhm.
And yeah, it's a very engaged work, very reflective of how engaged Victor Hugo was in real life. So, for those who may know, he was exiled to the island of Guernsey, which belongs to Great Britain. He was exiled there by Napoleon III, of whom he was a fierce critic.
Mhm.
He was very much against the death penalty almost 200 years before France abolished it. And it's very obvious throughout the entire novel just how engaged Victor Hugo is. He makes a very strong case against government oppression of people. He makes a very strong case for the freedom of the lower class, for against the harassment of petty criminals by police, laws, and institutions. So he
Mhm.
makes a very Christian case about it too, since as soon as Jean Valjean is freed from prison, the first thing he's tempted to do is steal from a clergyman, and as soon as he does so, he's caught by the police, and the only reason he isn't rearrested and sent for who knows how many more years in
Yes.
prison is because the clergyman gives him an alibi and lets him flee with what he stole,
Mhm.
giving him a second chance in life. And that's the kind of Christian goodness. That's the kind of social welfare that Victor Hugo advocated for in real life, and it's very much present his epic novel Les Misérables.
Mhm. Great, yes. And what do you think about the appeal of this novel? Because there have been several adaptations to film, and even like a Broadway production, right? So several adaptations in several mediums of this media, right? By film, by theater. What do you think resonates with people? Is this story of a second chance of somebody trying to do good after they messed up, or like what in particular do you think the appeal of this of Le Miserable is?
It has it has a permanent kind of appeal because it's sort of it fits very well in our free market societies even before capitalism was fully introduced in
Hmm.
France.
Hmm.
It treats stories of upward mobility. It treats stories of guilt, baggage, of whether a person is defined by their past or
Hmm.
whether a person can fully emancipate themselves from the situation where they were born. So
Hmm.
Jean Valjean goes up and down in social mobility throughout the entire novel. He starts off as a petty criminal, leaves jail, is able to turn into a wealthy industrialist, a philanthropist, and then mayor of a town of a town that loves him, and then
Hmm.
goes back into the shadows as soon as he has to show his past identity again. And that's something a lot of people can really identify with because we live in a sort of society where we no longer have to rely on castes, on aristocracy, on the situation you were born in many cases.
Hmm. Right, and we also see this exploitation of Cosette, for example, his daughter, right? And
Mhm.
that's another theme of this novel, right? Yes, the exploitation of the poor by upper classes and the unjust and unfair treatment, right? And I think that's also part of the
It's much
title,
more
right?
than that. It also treats of the exploitation of the poor by also the poor through, for example, the famille Thénardier, the Thénardier family, who are
Hmm.
these con people. So the husband is the owner of a bed and breakfast that keeps stealing from his clients. His
Hmm.
wife is fully in on it and also abuses Cosette, who they were entrusted by Cosette's mother, who had to separate herself from her to be able to subside for both of them.
Hmm.
And that's when Jean Valjean is introduced as the one who's going to work his ass off, if I may, to
Yes.
to help her and give her a proper home with a proper parental figure.
Hmm. Exactly, yes. And so people in France, there because I know here in the States, sometimes people just say, "I love Le Mise," right? But the complete title, of course, Le Miserable, right?
Mhm.
Um, and it's just in France. So are people aware of, from what you know, of how important this novel is internationally, right? Not just for France. Um,
I think they are. Of course, Victor Hugo is treated very differently in France as he is in the rest of the world, because
mhm.
in France we're also much more in touch with the rest of his work. So whether that's like his stage plays like Lucrezia Borgia, his historical plays like Ruy Blas, but also his poetry like Demain dès l'aube, tomorrow at dawn.
Exactly. What
He
about
also
Madame Bovary? Was that
That's Flaubert. That's Gustave
Flaubert?
Flaubert.
You're right. Yes.
Yeah, and there's also other novels like Les Misérables, who are very dense. For those who enjoy Paris, there's also Notre Dame de Paris, also known as The Hunchback of Notre Dame
Mhm.
in
Yes.
English. That one was also adapted into many movies, many plays, and has a successful musical with it.
Hmm.
But yeah, Les Misérables, it was adapted into a Broadway musical first in French and then translated in English and got an enormous success there. And That's still because of the factors that made the book originally so popular. It's the treatment of the very progressive treatment of how poor people should be treated, of how society should be built around redemption and second chances. Yeah,
Mhm.
which is something Victor Hugo always advocated for.
Mhm. Exactly, I agree. Yes, thank you so much. Um,